Hi everyone.
Welcome back to Shades of Guilt. Last time we told you the story of Peyo Peev, who was killed by his wife, and not only by her, but also by his mother-in-law. So to do a quick recap, Peyo Peev was 44 years old, and he married his wife Gabriela, who was 33 at the time of the crime, 3 weeks before she gave birth to her second child. Her second child was not Peyo's biological child. However, when they married, he became the father of this child. And the problem between the two of them was a custody battle. So Gabriela thought that the only way to remove the obstacles is to kill Peyo. I don't know if this was under the influence of her mother, but it's very possible. So they lured him and they killed him into his own car. They strangled him and then they tried to burn the car. So listen to part 2 of Peyo Peev's story. So last time we reached the point where Gabriela was arrested and she was expecting trial. However, she wasn't placed in prison, she wasn't placed in a cell, she was actually home. She is under home arrest. And that's been going on for 2 years. I guess you realize that this is making me mad, because it is. And I really don't know how is this possible, because if I murdered someone, I would be in jail. And people who even didn't murder anyone spent a lot of time in jail before their trial, but not Gabriela. So apparently some people are more equal than others in the eyes of the law. Actually, people were furious. People were protesting because this is not how it's supposed to work. It's not how justice should be served. There were protests and fathers' rights groups got involved. The case became a symbol of everything wrong with the system. The slow pace, the lack of enforcement, the way psychological violence is ignored until it becomes physical violence. And I'm not only talking about this case, I'm talking about all the cases where domestic violence is involved. And it's both in male versus female violence and female versus male violence, because domestic violence doesn't have a gender. Domestic violence should be domestic violence in spite of gender, and people should be treated equally. If women do want equality, we should take equal responsibility. This is my take, this is my personal view, and I know that it's actually the personal view of a lot of people in Bulgaria, simply because I've read about the case, I've followed the news, and I also followed the protests. And all through this, Peyo's family was grieving. His sister Milena became the voice of the family. She went on TV, she gave interviews, she spoke at protests, and every time she talks about her brother, you could hear the heartbreak in her voice. She described him as gentle, patient, non-aggressive, a man who never raised a hand to anyone, not a woman, not a man, not to anyone. A man who just wanted to be a father. That's all he wanted. He wanted to see his son regularly and to be the father of a child that wasn't even his. Because the second child wasn't Peyo's biological child. And let's talk about the children for a moment, because they are the silent victims in all of this, and I think that they're actually the biggest victims in all of this, because their mother killed their father, which left them with no parents except for Veliko, who is still fighting custody battle. to have visitation rights and to be able to raise his son. But the older child has no father, and his mother is arrested and she's charged with murder. That child, the older boy, was placed with Peyo's family after the murder, and according to them, the child is doing very well. He loves music, he plays piano and flute, and he's adjusting. But he's also a child who lost his father in the most traumatic way imaginable. And whether he understood the details or not, he felt the loss. And also, that child is growing up, he's going to school, and eventually someone is going to start teasing or even bullying that child. And this is so unfair because the child has no fault in this. The child is completely innocent, and just because his mother decided to kill his father, that doesn't excuse any type of mental violence or anything against the child. The younger child, the one whose biological father is Veliku, was also placed with the family. And Veliku, who had been fighting for recognition even before the murder, suddenly found himself living with Peyo's parents. The two men who had both been pushed out of their children's lives by the same woman, they were now united by tragedy. And also, if the older child is placed with Peyo's parents and the younger child is also placed with them, I still wonder why Gabriela is under house arrest, because the initial reason why the court placed her under home arrest was that she was supposed to be taking care of the children. If she's not taking care of the children, why is she not in prison? I honestly don't understand this. Please, someone from the judicial system, if you have any idea as to why she's in house arrest, please let me know, because this makes zero sense to me, like literally zero sense. And that's something you don't often see in crime cases. I mean, the fact that the two fathers unite to be able to see their children. They're both fighting for custody with the same woman, both caught in the same web of manipulation, both victims in different ways. But while the children are adjusting, the legal system was moving in its own pace, meaning it's moving like a snail, even slower than a snail. The indictment was filed in February 2025, more than a year after the murder. The trial didn't begin until April 2025, and even then it was delay after delay. Missing experts, scheduling issues, procedural complications. By early 2026, more than 2 years after the murder, there is still no verdict. Every time the court refused to change Gabriela's house arrest to full detention, the public grew angrier, because from the outside it looks like the system is bending over backwards to accommodate the accused while the victim's family is left waiting. And let's talk about the psychology behind all of this, because this case isn't just about what happened, it's about why it happened. Custody disputes are emotional, they're messy, and they bring out the worst in people. But most of the time they don't end in murder. So what made this case different? And the only reason why I think this happened is control. Control was the driving force behind everything. Control over the children, control over the narrative, control over the legal process, control over the family dynamic. And when someone like Peyo, someone patient, someone kind, someone reasonable, and someone who believes in the system, tries to navigate a conflict with someone who values control above all, the imbalance becomes dangerous simply because Peyo only had the judicial system, which in this case we see what happens, and Gabriela had a lot more instruments, let's say, to move. And when you add her mother, a diplomat with decades of experience, someone used to negotiating, someone used to getting her way, someone who allegedly viewed Peyo as an obstacle to her daughter's future, and suddenly the conflict isn't just between two parents, it becomes a multi-generational power struggle. And there is the thing, when two people shared a distorted belief, they reinforce each other. You know how a group can make you kind of do things that you never wanted to do. Peer pressure can actually influence a lot of people into doing stuff they wouldn't normally do. And when two people reinforce each other that they're right, that this is the only way, that this is the correct way to act, this becomes a problem. It becomes a source of violence. And the violence in this case didn't come out of nowhere. It was the final step in a long chain of psychological escalation. And that's why this case resonated so deeply in Bulgaria, because it wasn't just about one family. It was about a system that doesn't take psychological violence seriously. A system that doesn't enforce visitation orders. A system that assumes mothers are always the safer parent, which definitely isn't the case. And a system that moves so slowly that people lose hope. And sometimes if the child is older, people don't, even if people don't lose hope, the child turns 18 and then it's no longer a child. So the system should be moving a lot faster than it does right now. And when people lose hope, they become vulnerable. And when people who crave control see this vulnerability, they exploit it. Let's go back to the night of the murder, because there is something about that moment that stays with you. Imagine sitting in your car with someone you once trusted, someone you once believed you could reason with, someone you married, even if the marriage was complicated. And then imagine her mother climbing into the back seat, and suddenly the air changes, the energy shifts, and you realize something is wrong, but it's too late. And then hands wrap around your neck. And you fight with everything you have. You try to steer the car towards the light, towards visibility, towards help. You try to escape. You try to breathe. You try to survive, but you can't. And people killing you aren't strangers, they're family. That's the part that haunts people. That's the part that makes this case unforgettable. After the murder, after the fire, after the arrest, after the trial began, after the protests, after the interviews, after the public outrage, there is still one question that lingers. Could all of this have been prevented? And the answer is yes. At so many points along the way, this could have been prevented if visitation orders had been enforced, if psychological violence had been recognized, if it was taken more seriously, if the paternity situation had been resolved sooner, if the legal system had moved faster, if social services had intervened more decisively, if someone had seen the warning signs. And here I need to say that Yes, people did see warning signs. Peyo's family did. However, he was a grown man. He was 44. So you cannot expect his parents or his sister to make him do something. He was trying to resolve a conflict. They saw that this was, if not impossible, very hard at least. However, they had no control over his decisions. So he made the decision to be the decent person, which led to his death. And that's the tragedy, because Peyo didn't die because he was reckless. He didn't die because he was violent. He didn't die because he was irresponsible. He didn't die because he did something wrong. He died because he trusted the wrong people. He died because he believed in dialogue. He died because he believed in the system. He died because he believed that the mother of his child would never hurt him, and that belief cost him his life. When you look at the timeline of this case, it's almost like watching it in slow motion. You can see every warning sign, you can see every moment where someone could have stepped in, and yet nothing stopped it. You see the tension building, the resentment growing, the control lingering, and still nobody stopped it. Nothing interrupted the tragedy. It just kept going until it reached the point of no return. And that's what makes this case so haunting, because it wasn't sudden, it wasn't unpredictable. Although I don't think anyone could have predicted that Gabriela would murder him, but still someone could have intervened and prevented all of this. It was a tragedy that unfolded in plain sight. And let's talk about the investigation, my favorite part of this case. Because once the burned car was found, things actually moved very quickly, at least at first. Forensic experts determined that Peyo had been strangled before the fire. There were no signs of smoke inhalation, no soot in the lungs, no burns in the airway, which means he was dead before the flames even touched him. And the security footage, that was the nail in the coffin. The camera captured the car moving erratically, jerking forward, swerving slightly. You saw the videos yourself. That kind of movement you'd expect from someone fighting for their life while trying to stir the car. It was heartbreaking, because you can almost imagine what was happening inside that car. The panic, the desperation, the realization that the people attacking you aren't strangers, they're people you once trusted. And when investigators traced the timeline, it became clear that Gabriela and her mother were the last people to see him alive. Their stories didn't match the evidence, their behavior didn't match the circumstances. And the more investigators dug, the more the pieces fell into place. And this is why I said it was my favorite part of this case, because this is where the institutions actually did their job correctly. They didn't stall, they didn't make any mistakes. However, after that, everything turned back into slow motion. Gabriela and her mother were arrested, and for a moment it felt like justice is coming, because the investigation did their job. But then the legal system did what the legal system does. It slowed down. It hesitated. It got tangled in procedures, in hearings, and evaluations, and suddenly the case wasn't just about what happened in the car, it was about everything that led up to it. The custody battles, the ignored visitation orders, the psychological pressure, the paternity dispute, the involvement of social services, the years of conflict that had been allowed to escalate unchecked. And that's when the public got involved, because people saw themselves in this case. They saw their own custody battles, their own frustrations with the system, their own fears about what could have happened, when conflicts spiral out of control. And people were angry. They were angry that a father who followed the rules, who went through the courts, who tried to do everything the right way, ended up dead. They were angry that the accused was sitting at home under house arrest while the victim's family was grieving. They were angry that the trial was dragging on with no end in sight. And honestly, I get it, because when you look at the facts, it's hard not to feel that frustration. It's hard not to feel that sense of injustice, because this thing can happen to anybody. And if it's somebody you love, you would want everything to move faster, but it doesn't. And this is where I want to go deeper into the psychology of this case, because this isn't just a story about murder, it's a story about power, about control, about the way relationships can become battlegrounds, and about the way unresolved conflict can turn into something dark and dangerous. When you look at Gabriela's behavior, the alleged manipulation, the alleged threats, the alleged financial demands, you see a pattern of control, a pattern of using the child as leverage, a pattern of creating instability and then using that instability to justify more control. And I'm a mother. I honestly have a very strong opinion about this, because if a father wants to see his child, nobody should stop him, unless the father is dangerous. But if a father wants to see his child, he should be allowed to do it, because the relationship between a child and a father is something that you cannot replace with anything else. Yes, a single mother can raise a child on her own, and that child can grow up very happy and healthy and everything. But the father figure is incredibly important, in my opinion, in any child's life. So when she was trying to stop both fathers of her children from visiting them, from seeing them, from spending time with them, I really do not understand why this is happening and why people do it. It's just beyond me. And when you look at Krasimira's behavior, the alleged involvement in the attack, the alleged influence over her daughter, the history of conflict in her diplomatic career, you see another pattern. A pattern of escalation, a pattern of confrontation, a pattern of viewing opposition as something to be eliminated rather than negotiated. And also a pattern of I want what I want and I want it now, and anything that's in my way needs to be removed. It doesn't matter if I'm right or not. When you put those two patterns together, you see a dangerous dynamic, a dynamic where conflict doesn't get resolved, it gets amplified. A dynamic where disagreements don't lead to compromise, they lead to retaliation. A dynamic where the presence of a child doesn't soften the situation, it becomes the weapon. Because people do be weaponizing their children against the other parent. And Peyo, he was the opposite of that dynamic. He was calm, he was patient, non-confrontational. He believed in the system, he believed in dialogue, he believed in doing things the right way. And all our lives we've been told, if you do things the right way, you're gonna win. You're gonna get what you want because you're doing things the right way. And this didn't happen in Peyo's case. Because when you're dealing with people who thrive on control, your patience becomes their opportunity, your calm becomes their advantage, your trust becomes their weapon. And that's exactly what happened. Let's go to the trial. Because the trial is where everything came to the surface. Witnesses testified about the custody battles, about the ignored visitation orders, about the psychological pressure, about the paternity disputes, about the alleged threats, about the alleged manipulation, about the years of conflict that have been simmering beneath the surface. Psychiatric evaluations came to the conclusion that both accused are fully sane, fully responsible, fully aware of their actions. And that's chilling. It's actually very frightening, because it means that this wasn't a moment of madness, this wasn't a breakdown, it wasn't a temporary lapse of judgment. This was deliberate, it was calculated and intentional. And yet, despite all of that, the trial dragged on, hearing after hearing, delay after delay, procedural issues, missing experts, scheduling conflicts, and through it all, Peyo's family sat in the courtroom waiting, hoping, grieving, listening again and again. What happened to him? The children were growing up in the middle of all of this. The older child, who has already been through years of conflict, was now dealing with the loss of his father, and the younger child, who had been born into chaos, now was living with a family connected to a man he never met and who wasn't his biological father. And both children are caught in a legal and emotional storm that they didn't choose and couldn't understand. And that's the part that breaks my heart, because the children didn't ask for any of this. They didn't ask to be born into conflict. They didn't ask to be used as leverage. They didn't ask to lose their father. And they didn't ask to be placed in the middle of a legal battle. They didn't ask to become symbols in a national debate. They just wanted to be loved, to be safe, to be children. But instead, they became collateral damage in a conflict that's spiraled out of control. And what I do not understand is, how can Gabriela not think of her children for a moment? Because she may say she loves her children, but that's not love. How do you love your children killing their father? How do you love your children not allowing them to see their father before you killed them? And the more you learn about the case, the more you realize that it wasn't just a family tragedy, it was a societal tragedy, a tragedy that exposed the cracks in the system, a tragedy that showed how psychological violence can escalate into physical violence, and tragedy that showed how custody battles can become battlegrounds, a tragedy that showed how the legal system can fail the very people it's supposed to protect and the people who actually believed in it. And that's why this case matters, because it's not just about what happened to Peyo, it's about what could happen to anyone caught in a similar situation. It's about the warning signs we ignore, the red flags we dismiss, the system we trust that don't always protect us. And this is about the people who fall through the cracks. People like Peyo. People who believe in the system and who follow the rules. People who try to do the right thing. People who just want to be parents. People who just want peace. People who never imagine that the person sitting beside them in a car could be the one who ends their life. And the next question that keeps on lingering is, how do we prevent this from happening again? And the answer is complicated, because it requires change. It requires recognizing psychological violence as real violence, which it is. Psychological violence is extremely bad, simply because the wounds from physical violence, they heal. But some wounds from psychological violence don't heal, ever. They just stay with you throughout your life. The change requires enforcing visitation orders. It requires faster legal processes. It requires better support for parents in high conflict situations. It requires acknowledging that mothers are not automatically the safer parent. It requires understanding that control can be just as dangerous as anger. But most of all, it requires listening. Listening to the warning signs, listening to the people who say they feel unsafe, listening to the people who say they're being manipulated, listening to the people who say that the system isn't protecting them. Because if someone had listened to Peyo, really listened, he might still be alive. And when you step back and look at the whole picture, it's almost surreal how many layers of this case has. It's not just a murder. It's not just a custody battle. It's not just a dysfunctional relationship. It's a whole ecosystem of conflict, legal, emotional, psychological, that keep feeding into itself until it finally exploded. And honestly, one of the most heartbreaking parts is how normal everything looked from the outside. If you saw Peyo walking down the street, you'd never guess that he was fighting a war behind the scenes. If you saw Gabriela at work, you'd never guess she was allegedly orchestrating a plan that would end in murder. If you saw Krasimira at the diplomatic event, you'd never guess that she would one day be accused of strangling her son-in-law in the back seat of his car. And that's the contrast, the normalcy versus reality, that makes that case so chilling. But let's talk about the years leading up to the murder, because the more you understand the build-up, the more the ending makes a twisted kind of sense. Well, not sense as in justification, absolutely not, but sense as in, oh, this was heading somewhere dark for a long time. The custody battle started early, and they didn't just start. They escalated. First agreement in 2020, ignored. Second agreement in 2022, also ignored. And every time Peyo tried to enforce his rights, he hit a wall. A slow, bureaucratic, frustrating wall. And here's the thing, when you are a parent fighting for access to your child, every delay feels like a lifetime. Every missed visit feels like a loss, because you're missing milestones. You're missing the child starting to talk. You're missing the child starting to read. You're missing the child having experiences that you might have enjoyed together. And every ignored court order feels like a betrayal. And Peyo felt all of that, but he didn't lash out. He didn't retaliate. He didn't try to win. He tried to follow the law. He tried to be patient. He tried to be reasonable. And that patience, that calm, steady engineer, brain patience became his downfall. Because while he was trying to de-escalate, the other side was escalating. And then came the second child, the paternity dispute. Honestly, I don't know how people do this. I, in some cases, do understand cheating. I do not understand why you would marry one person, almost extorting them to marry you so they can see their child, and then not allow them to see any of the children. Like, why do people do this? The marriage was 3 weeks before the birth of the second child. The DNA test, the legal filings, the emotional chaos, and through all of that, Peyo was still trying to be fair, still trying to be honest, still trying to do the right thing. he was on Veliko's side because Veliko was also trying to gain custody of his child. And that's the part that makes you want to scream, because he wasn't playing games, he wasn't manipulating anyone, he wasn't trying to take something that wasn't his. He was trying to help. He was trying to support the biological father. He was trying to protect the children. He was trying to keep the peace. But peace wasn't possible, not in this dynamic anyway. Because when someone thrives in control, your fairness becomes a threat. Your honesty becomes a weakness. Your patience becomes an opportunity, and that's exactly what happened. And after the trial, Gabriela kept filing lawsuits. Civil lawsuits, complaints, requests, demands. Even while under house arrest, she's still trying to control the narrative, still trying to control the children's placement, still trying to control the situation. And that's when you realize the control didn't stop with the murder, it didn't stop with the arrest, it didn't stop with the trial, it kept going, because for some people control isn't just behavior, it's an identity. And then there's the mother, Krasimira, the diplomat, the woman who spent decades representing Bulgaria abroad, the woman who allegedly strangled her son-in-law in the backseat of her car. Her behavior in court was interesting. She denied involvement. She criticized the victim's family. The audacity of this woman, I swear. I don't understand how this is even possible. She complained about her treatment. Well, you know what, sister? No one cares. She insisted that she was being mistreated. Again, no one cares. She insisted that she had nothing to do with the death. Yeah, nobody believes that. And look, everyone has the right to defend themselves. Everyone has the right to a fair trial. But the contrast between her polished diplomatic persona and the brutality of the crime she was accused of is jarring. It's unsettling. It's kind of the contrast that makes you question how well you really know the people around you. It's really, really taxing. And that's one of the themes of this case. The hidden lives people lead, the masks they wear, the personas they present, the secrets they keep. Because from the outside, this family looked normal. Educated, professional, successful, but behind closed doors, it was a storm. A storm that had been building for years. And the legal system, it wasn't equipped to handle that storm. And because the legal system is slow, it's procedural, it's bureaucratic, it's reactive, not proactive. It waits for things to escalate before it intervenes, and by the time it intervenes, it's often too late. We know of multiple cases like that. A friend of mine was threatened by someone, and the police said, well, you cannot do anything because she hasn't done anything, really. And then the question was, well, should I be waiting to get murdered in an alley so you can do something about this? And the answer was pretty much, yeah, you should. So, the children, I still keep coming back to the children, but they're the heart of the story. They're the reason Peyo fought so hard. They're the reason he kept going. They're the reason he kept trying to negotiate, kept trying to compromise, kept trying to keep the peace. And now they're growing up without a father, growing up in the shadow of a tragedy they didn't choose, growing up with a story that will follow them for the rest of their lives. And that's the part that breaks you, because the children didn't ask for any of this. They didn't ask to be born into conflict or to be used as leverage. And instead they become collateral damage in a conflict that spiraled out of control. And this is our case about Peyo Peev's murder. Unfortunately, there is still no conviction. Gabriela is still in house arrest, and her mother is behind bars, but I don't think this is any consolation for Peyo's family, or friends, or people in general, because in my opinion, both of them deserve life without parole behind bars. This is my personal opinion. Some people may disagree. Some people may think that she did what she did because she feared she's gonna lose her children. Yet I don't think anything excuses murder. Tell us what you think in the comments below. Give us your honest opinion and give us a like.
You said it all, so
Subscribe to the channel and share our videos. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye.